He got his start on a TV show, The Apprentice. And we saw how entertaining it can be to fire people. But that's entertainment. That's not how you run an organization. And we have seen a performative effort to try to convince us that they're saving money. They're doing this in order to justify their plan for a $3.5 trillion tax cut for hedge fund managers, multinational corporations, and billionaires. But they're really not saving anything. And then yesterday we pass a budget resolution, and all my Republican colleagues are on Twitter or X, whatever they want to call it, saying that that resolution contains statutory language to say no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. Well, what did Elon Musk have to say about that? Or what did his organization have to say? You know, they organized the readers' content comments to correct falsehoods that people put in their tweets. And every single time a Republican went up and said that that resolution hadn't eliminated taxes on tips, overtime, and Social Security, the Musk organization said, readers added context. None of the policies mentioned in this post were included in the House budget resolution. It does nothing to exempt tips, Social Security, or overtime, and we know they're not going to ultimately do that because they need the $4.5 trillion to provide tax breaks for hedge fund managers, multinational corporations, and billionaires. Now, government is frustrating. Frustrates me often, needs to be improved. You know what's also frustrating? Sometimes my computer's on the blink a little bit, and I just want to take a hammer and hit it up the side. You know, that makes me feel good, but it doesn't actually make the device work any better. And there are several techniques being used on the federal government that may make us feel good, but don't make it work any better. You see, you can fire people, and they are firing just about everybody in the government with less than 2 years of government service, the probationary employees. That destroys our future. Those are the people hired in 2024 that we're going to need in 2034. You know, the Dodgers are a pretty well-run organization, I think run better than government. Imagine if the Dodgers were going to fire everybody who joined, all the players that had joined in the last 2 years, just eliminate everybody in single A and double A ball. I would say that would make it a bad, they'd be worse than the White Sox. So you can fire people. You can also do the buyouts. They offered everybody in government a buyout. So who took the buyout? The people who could easily get another job elsewhere because they have very high capacity, and the people who are going to retire in the next year or two anyway, so why not get 8 months free vacation? And then they have the hiring freeze. Well, imagine if the Dodgers stopped signing new talent. Where would they be in the 2030s? You can also stop all research, and I'll get to an example of that. And then you argue, well, hey, the research, if in 2026 they can say, hey, we saved all this money, and the research wouldn't have benefited you by 2026, but who is going to be dying from cancer and other diseases in the 2030s because of the research they're stopping now? And then they can do a whoopsie-daisy and say, oh, we stopped the research, oh, we started it again. No. You stopped the research, and all those little white rats are dead. You can't start again. You got to start over the research. You can stop maintenance, and I'll get to an example of that. Saves you money unless you actually want things to work well. And again, we're told that there's just a government mulligan. They'll just do it over. Oopsie-daisy is not a way to run a multi-trillion-dollar organization. We're told that there's $50 million for condoms and $100 million for condoms in Gaza. And then they said, never mind, we got it wrong. We made a mistake. Oopsie-daisy. They decided to offer all of the air traffic controllers 8 months free pay for quitting. And then they say, oopsie daisy. And then today, Elon Musk tweets, there's a shortage of top-notch air traffic controllers. If you have retired but are open to returning to work, please consider to do so. He just gave them 8 months pay to stay home. Now he hopes they're going to come back. No. The fishing is good. The 8 months pay is guaranteed. But it's even worse. You see, not only did they give buyouts to the air traffic controllers, they have fired the navigational aid maintenance personnel. So those air traffic controllers are going to be looking at empty screens, and those folks remain fired. What could go wrong? They also stopped our efforts against Ebola. Some of the charities were barely getting by. They've gone bankrupt. They've pulled their people out of Africa. And then he says, oopsie daisy, we're going to start that again. What a way to run a government. There are people who are going to get Ebola as a result of this oopsie daisy mistake. And that's another opportunity for Ebola inside a human being to mutate a little bit and then be a more pathogenic Ebola when it comes here. And then finally, they fired 300 people who were in charge of security of our nuclear weapons. Oopsie daisy, what could have gone wrong? And keep in mind, if you fire somebody and then hire them back or say you're going to fire them and you don't fire them, you say, oh, no harm, no foul, oopsie daisy. Nope. You see, once you do that to a person, their resume's on LinkedIn, they're looking for a new job. Nobody wants to stay with an employer if they have other opportunities, if that employer is teasing them about firing them, or worse yet, actually fired them and then got them back. So whom our best people will be leaving in the weeks to come, even if they hired them back. Now, there is real waste, fraud, and abuse in government. And this is an example. $200 million of our taxpayer money being spent on advertisements praising Donald Trump. How do they justify this? Well, they aim these at their own base to tell their own base, hey, Donald Trump is great, and here's a commercial to tell you that. But they claim that these ads are aimed at undocumented immigrants, and that somehow by watching a 30-second ad, the immigrants are going to say, oopsie daisy, I made a mistake. Venezuela really is better than California. I don't think so. There's nothing you can put in a 30-second ad that's going to cause somebody who's here to decide that they want to be back there. These are people who walked here from Venezuela. They went through the Darien Gap. They dealt with the forest. They dealt with the snakes. They dealt with the predators. They dealt with the drug dealers. They came into our country at great person. And they're going to see a 30-second ad praising Donald Trump and decide to walk back or even fly back? What a stupid excuse that is for the obvious election interference of spending $200 million of taxpayer money on on ads praising Donald Trump. Well, let's look what's happening at the VA. They fired 2,000 people there. Oh, they're still hiring, but they're fired 2,000 people there. We have a nursing shortage. They have a nursing shortage in this country. The nurses they've fired are going to find jobs elsewhere very quickly, and they're not going to get them back. The VA has stopped its clinical trials on cancer. So, even if you're not a veteran, you may be dying next decade because of the research that's not being done this decade. They're canceling operations. They're increasing the wait times at the VA. And they have fired the suicide crisis line counselors. There is veterans' blood on the hands of a man who never served his country. That's right, Elon Musk never served in the South African army. My district includes the Pacific Palisades. I want to thank so many of my colleagues for their expressions of sympathy. And I've had a chance to work, as I always do, with my constituents dealing with government, and it's sometimes frustrating. Short deadlines imposed on people who have fled their homes. Form letters that are confusing as hell and make people think they're not eligible. But you know how you can make it all worse? Fly to my district, as the president did, and announce you really want to eliminate FEMA entirely. While I've got FEMA workers working 12 hours a day with my constituents trying to solve problems. Offering the FEMA workers a buyout, including the temporary workers. In any disaster, you go in with temporary work, you have to hire temporary workers. They all may only have a 3 or 4 month job, but they were offered 8 months' pay to stay home. What a way to deal with a disaster. And then the president says he wants to impose conditions on the aid. They want to abolish the California Coastal Commission, which takes steps to prevent billionaires with beachfront property to not wall off the beach and prevent anybody else from getting in the sand. I can see why Donald Trump would identify with those billionaires, but that is the condition he wants to impose. I voted for aid for hurricane victims in Louisiana. And it never occurred to me to turn to a victim of a hurricane in Louisiana and say, you stay on your cousin's couch, no federal aid for you until your state changes its abortion laws. Now is not the time to take hostage fire victims or hurricane victims in an effort to try to force a state government to take an action that this or that member of Congress or this or that president wants them to take. Now, I will say that we are going, and I want to assure the country, we're going to build back better. We're going to make sure that the Palisades does not burn again. We have a very strict fire building code that's applicable to all new construction in the Palisades and other fire-prone areas. Mr. Speaker, I would ask how much time I have remaining.
The gentleman has 17 minutes remaining.
The gentleman has 17 minutes remaining.
Thank you. You know, Mr. Speaker, my party has put confidence in me and made me the chief Democrat dealing with the subcommittee on the stock and bond markets. Our SEC oversees our capital markets, which are the nerve center of global capitalism. Virtually all the most powerful companies in America and really the world focus on one goal, and that is to increase their value of their company stock on our capital markets. Our capital markets are the envy of the world. The securities traded there are worth over $100 trillion. It is fragile, it is delicate, it is the nerve center of global capitalism. So why don't we just let big balls take a whack at it? What could go wrong? Now, whether it is crime in the streets or crime in the suites, we should not defund the police. You don't defund the men and women in blue, and you don't defund the Securities Exchange Commission that oversees the stock and bond markets. The SEC has a $2 billion budget. It secured over $3.2 billion in fines, in effect, to those on Wall Street that did the wrong thing, so it more than paid for itself. And, no, that was $2.2 billion that went back to investors. $8.2 billion in fines. So the federal government made 4 times its money on the SEC. But there are those at DOGE that want to, in effect, abolish the SEC, get the same kind of securities regulation on Wall Street that they have in Botswana or Kazakhstan, that is to say no regulation at all, and see what happens. Well, 2 years from now, we'll have to see, did the SEC under the Trump administration secure $8.2 billion paid to the federal government or $3.2 billion returned to investors? If not, it will not be because there's no crime in the suites, that there's no crooks on Wall Street. It will not be because the wolves of Wall Street have become lambs. It will be because they defunded the police of Wall Street. A lot of attention is being spent here in Congress on China. And with 28 years of experience on the Foreign Affairs Committee, I would like to address that issue. The problem started, the big part of the problem started, when this Congress voted to give most favored nation status to China. That was at the beginning of this century. We were told that it would only increase our trade deficit by $1 billion a year. That prediction was off by 4,000%. The vast majority of Democrats voted no on that bill, which was the action which made China a worldwide economic superpower, got it in to the international trading organizations, opened up access to our markets. And we voted no when a Democratic president was twisting our arms to vote yes. It was our proudest moment. And I hope my Republican colleagues will have a proud moment when they stand up to a president of their own party. Unfortunately, Republican votes and a few Democratic votes passed that. We now have our markets wide open to China. Their markets aren't particularly open to us. And we have huge trade deficits, and those trade deficits with China were $150 billion higher under the Trump administration than they were under the Biden administration. And they were particularly high in the portion of the Trump administration before COVID. It wasn't a COVID thing. Trump's policy is to yell loudly and accomplish nothing when it comes to dealing with our trade deficits with China. Now, Trump talks about other countries eating our lunch. Under his first question I've asked at hearing after hearing is, can anybody give me a reason why we should use our tax system and lose our tax dollars to incentivize Americans buying Chinese stocks? And not a single member can give a reason, not a single one of our witnesses can give a reason why we should do that. We forgo hundreds of millions, billions of dollars in taxes on the gains people earn on investing in Chinese stocks. We encourage them to invest in the Chinese economy with our tax dollars. But only one Republican has stepped forward and co-sponsored my legislation to eliminate the capital gains allowance, the tax incentive for investing in Chinese stocks. Why is that? Because the billionaire class wants subsidies for every investment they make, even when they're building the Chinese economy or the Russian economy or the Iranian economy. It is time to stand up to the billionaire class. You cannot confront China if you're unwilling to do so. We also need to take steps so that Chinese stocks are not included in index funds, and so that every company that reports to the SEC informs its shareholders of what risk they have due to their dependence on China and what they're doing about it, so that every private company is de-risking from China and doing everything they can so that if, God forbid, China wants to end the trade relationship, or God forbid, China invades Taiwan, these companies have minimized the risk that our economy faces. Now, one area where we need to be particularly strong is in those islands in the Pacific between the United States and China. My father fought in the Pacific. He landed the boats on island shores. We need to maintain our influence in places like the Solomon Islands, in places like the Cook Islands. The Solomon Islands being a place where thousands and thousands of American Marines died, and many in the Navy as well. And so, what have we done? We've eliminated our aid program of 20, and these countries are very small, these islands are small, the aid programs are small, yet they have a tremendous impact on influence in these strategic islands. We eliminated the $21 million support island for the Solomon Islands. We eliminated our $95,000 for the Cook Islands. And this is how we confront China, or this is how we have performative savings. Now, we need to confront China. One way we also need to confront China is in international lending and the credit rating agencies, the bond rating agencies that rate the creditworthiness of countries. And we need to tell those who rate other countries' creditworthiness that if they don't repay a phony debt to China, a debt trap debt to China, that should not be counted against them. What do I mean? I mean when China makes a loan to Sri Lanka, that they know Sri Lanka is not going to be able to pay from that project. And they put in there that, oh, if you don't pay, we get to control your port. Sri Lanka should be encouraged, don't give your port to China, give your middle finger to China. And you will be able to borrow from American banks and European banks and international lending associations. We should never allow a credit rating agency under our control to ding a country that is subject to this kind of blackmail from China. And this brings up the issue of foreign aid in general. You know, if you poll Americans, they'll say we're spending too much on foreign aid, and then you ask them how much of our budget is going to foreign aid. They say 25% of our American budget is going to foreign aid. It ought to be less. Then you ask them what percentage should we be spending on foreign aid. They say 10%. Well, guess what? We're spending way less than 1% of our budget on foreign aid. We're spending way less than the American people think we're spending. We're spending less than they want to spend. But they want it cut because they think it's over 30 times what it actually is. And that is why Ronald Reagan recognized the importance of our foreign aid program. Now, I've been in Congress for a long time. And I remember when Congress confronted the executive branch. It wasn't just Democrats against Republicans. It was all of us against the executive branch. And there are times when both sides of the aisle are going to need to do that. Now, there are some criticisms that are valid against our foreign aid and State Department budget. The State Department is doing something that is too woke for me, but is supported by Elon Musk. And that is when they have in their budget spending $400 million to replace the perfectly good armored cars that the State Department has now, armored vehicles designed to make sure that our diplomats are safe in dangerous places. We have perfectly good armored cars, but there's a proposal the State Department spend $400 million on new zero greenhouse gas emitting armored cars. Pretty damn woke. You'd expect the State Department, you'd expect the DOGE to have crossed that out, but they won't, because the explicit statement is this is $400 million for Tesla Cybertruck armored cars. So you know Elon ain't cutting that. And you know what they did to fool us because they think we're stupid? They changed the document a little bit. They took out the word Tesla. So now the State Department is going to spend $400 million on armored, U.S.-made cyber trucks. Do they really think those aren't going to be Tesla cyber? Is there somebody else who makes armored cyber trucks in the United States? That money is going to reduce the greenhouse gases of our armored vehicles, and it's going to Elon Musk. But there are a lot of things that are said about our foreign aid budget that are completely false. Elon Musk already has admitted that his statement that $50 million was going to condoms for Gaza was just a total mistake. Oopsie daisy. He apologized. It's okay, he thinks, for DOGE to make a mistake, but if he can find even a single dollar of misspent money in any other agency, he says, well, that's a reason to abolish the whole agency and fire all the employees. Well, that $50 million was going for anti-AIDS programs in Africa, and some of it was going for condoms. That's one of the ways you try to prevent this transmission of AIDS. Now, why are these foreign aid programs in the interests of America? Well, first, you might think that we have a moral responsibility as the richest country in the world to do something for various poor countries in the world, but let's put that aside. If we don't provide foreign aid, China steps in, our influences decline, China's influence increases. If we don't provide aid to the very poorest people there, that gives them a strong incentive to try to come here. And you can try to stop him with a wall, but he had 4 years to build a wall, and he didn't build a wall. The best way to reduce irregular migration to America is to eliminate the reason that people are so desperate to come here. But finally, and most importantly, our aid deals with diseases. Musk already said, oopsie daisy, we didn't mean to cut the program to fight Ebola in Africa. He tries to restore it. Of course, he's already done so much damage to it, wasted so much money, who knows what. So that's more people getting Ebola in Africa, more chances for the disease to mutate, and then it comes here. But he is fine with cutting cutting our actions against HIV/AIDS. Same issue. That disease mutates in every human it infects. 1 out of 1,000, 1 out of 1,000,000 of those mutations make the disease more capable of surviving the drugs that we have, make it more communicable, make it more powerful when it comes back here. So a lot of Americans will be dying of AIDS next decade because of what we're doing or not doing in Africa this decade. So then they try to point to some other programs that are a waste of money. $6 million to help Egypt encourage tourism. Now, USAID, I've got Republican colleagues who think that, well, that's aid, that must be food for people who are hungry right now and are about to die of starvation. They don't know that USAID says U.S. Agency for International Development. The goal is not just to feed people who are hungry now, not just give a man a fish, not just give a woman a fish, teach them how to fish. And that's why an Agency for International Development would help Egypt develop its economy. You know what Egypt has? They got a lot of sand. That doesn't help them too much. They got pyramids. And if they can develop their tourist industry, which is a big chunk of their economy, they won't need our food aid because they'll have money of their own. So it was a good program, $6 million to help them get more tourists. You know who started that program? Donald Trump in his first, yes, they made a big deal of cutting a wasteful program that Donald Trump started. Then we're told that there's a circumcision program. And there was a circumcision program, voluntary, providing this very inexpensive operation. Why? Because you reduce by 60% the risk of female-to-male transmission of AIDS. It is the single cheapest thing you can do to reduce AIDS. And then you make a joke out of it. And yes, you can make a joke. But it's not a joke when more people die of AIDS in Africa and more AIDS mutates in Africa because you had a funny joke. The Ebola cut was a mistake. Musk admits it. Oopsie daisy. the cutting of efforts to deal with HIV/AIDS in Africa, also a mistake. Then we were told that USAID was spending... I would ask one last thing.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I ask unanimous consent for a conclusion.
The gentleman may ask
I
for
ask for unanimous consent to address the House
for 1 minute. You're recognized.
There's one other cut they made, and that is they cut oxygen in a clinic for people who had fled the terrible deaths in Burma, Myanmar. And as a result, a 71-year-old woman, Pei Ko Lau, died without her oxygen. And so I ask that this House not only reflect on the other 10,000 people in that refugee camp who are without medical care, but I ask that we adjourn in silence in the memory of Pei Ko Lau, who died at the hands of Elon Musk and DOGE. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does the gentleman have a motion?
I was not given the script for this, but I think I am given the script for this.
Yes, sir.
It's really very simple.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Sherman. The question is on the motion to adjourn. All those in favor say yay. Yay. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Monday next for a morning hour debate.